Greetings altered players, my name is Red Cuisine, and in today's video, we will be discussing the strongest unique effects you can find in Altered TCG's first set, Beyond the Gates. Thankfully, I waited long enough to make this, since Robin Hood's tax effect has been axed, that is coming off of the list. Before we get into the strongest effects for each faction, let's discuss the three types of uniques you can find in the Beyond the Gates pack. Bad, playable, and optimal. Bad uniques are typically strictly worse than the common or rare version of the card, or have unrealistic conditions to fulfill to achieve its effect. These typically fall into the F or D tier if you want to rank them. You should avoid these at all costs. Hopefully in Trial by Frost there won't be any of these. Playable uniques have a wide scope that can rank from a high D to a low A tier. If I had to define playable, I'd say that it's a unique where you are likely to be able to fulfill the conditions for this unique's effects, and the card is likely to have an impact on the game, and fits into the metagame. I put playable uniques into three categories to try and lower the scope of them. The first is a replacement unique. These are used to free up a rare slot in your deck. A great example is Lara Chronicler and Axium. Some Trace decks use the Lara Chronicler rare for its resupply effect. I personally enjoy using Lara Chronicler uniques instead. Her identity includes the resupply support effect, so by using her as a unique, I'm able to free up 2 rare slots for something else. I also use Flamel as a replacement unique in Fen, although the power of these I would consider optimal. Next is what I call a respectable unique. These are going to be, honestly, most of the uniques that you'll find in mini decks. These are fine if you lack an optimal unique, but the card's effect still contributes to your deck's main strategy. Here's an example of an Oris Sandman that I deem as respectable. The condition is easy to fulfill in any Oris deck, and these stats combined with putting a character to sleep is likely to advance your expedition. The arrow and support ability make this even better, but honestly, even without those, this would still be a playable unique. Another example is this Isenboshi that would be great for Arjun. You can use him to give more fodder for Arjun's anchor effect costs while boosting a plant that you had out the last turn. Also, the 1 reserve cost is legit too. The final type of playable unique is what I call a stat stick. These uniques are utilized mainly for their stats, including their hand and reserve costs and their support ability. An uninformed player might think that these uniques are bad, but I would choose a stat stick over a bad unique every single time. Here are a few examples of stat stick uniques that I've used. The Haven Warrior is straight stats here. I'd honestly trade that support ability for an extra island stat, but I mean, it is there, and I have used it at times. This Ouroboros Trickster has a very respectable stat line, especially for a Lara character. Its from reserve ability is there in case you're able to use it, but I'd rather use it for its support ability to anchor another character. I think this unique is an amazing stat stick. Lastly, this Kua is a 5/5/5 for 3 mana with Tough 1. That's a big boy. You do have to sacrifice a character, but in Oris that's not really much of an ask. From reserve, it costs 5, which is bad, but it has a support ability, so you won't end up having to let it overflow. The last type of unique are what I consider optimal uniques, usually sitting at a high B tier to an S tier. These uniques are peak when it comes to enabling a deck strategy. Optimal uniques will set your deck apart from the decks that lack them. The most obvious optimal unique are the At Dusk Izmir Spindle Harvesters. Having 3 of these in your Finest deck is a completely different deck from a Finest deck that lacks them. Another example of an optimal unique are the Muna Anchor Triggers. A Tasia deck running these are miles ahead of other Tasia decks, and if this effect is on a Capelia, the deck's effectiveness skyrockets even more. I do want to add a caveat that these are not necessary to be competitive. If you look at competitive result events, you'll notice that the top placing decks, usually 1 through 4, don't always have these uniques in them, so don't feel like you have to have these to play the game. Honestly, I would aim to get a playable unique in my deck, as these are the most satisfying to win with, because they're not crazy expensive or crazy strong, and they really do feel unique to utilize. So for the most fun, in my opinion, aim for the playable uniques, the respectable, the replacements, and the stat sticks. Now that we've covered that, let's go over some generic guidelines when evaluating uniques. First, the less conditions, the better. Unfortunately, right now, Axium suffers from having too many conditions on its uniques, so a lot of theirs get knocked down a peg. Arrows are always better than hands and reserve effect. Obviously, activating from anywhere is stronger than being restricted to one spot. Bravos can kind of get away with reserve effects because of Foundry, and I guess Axium can too. But even with those, arrows are still going to be better. Draw a card, resupply, sabotage, and removal effects with low to no conditions make any card better. The lower the mana cost, the better. That's just the nature of the game right now. Especially if you're in a faction that can anchor stuff, having a hand cost of 3 is going to be better than a hand cost of 4 or more. Okay, now let's get into the best effects for each faction, starting with Axium. And unfortunately, I don't think Axium has any neat effect text that is super game breaking compared to the other factions. If I'm mistaken, then please correct me in the comments. The best I've found is this Foundry armor and Ouroboros Inkcaster here that are able to combine to go infinite. And to be honest, I don't think I've ever seen any of these effects in the marketplace, so they're probably extremely rare. There's also another rare effect that allows you to turn your resupply into a scry effect. The best effects for Sierra are ones that let you activate the arrow effects of your permanents, and support effects that activate the arrow effect of permanents. Dr. Frankenstein and Ganesha do this already, so they can be used as replacements, but these effects can typically be found on any name, so keep an eye out. The best effects for Trace are cards with a low mana cost, emphasis on low mana cost, that speed up the process of achieving 5 scrap counters. This effect text, put a card from hand to reserve to draw or resupply, behind an arrow is the best that you can get for Trace. Sabash appreciates the helping hand effect, allowing him to maintain steam over the course of the game. Him and Trace also appreciate characters that can grant your other characters the Haven effect. Next up is Bravos. The most sought after effects also cause an infinite loop. Foundry armor can possess an ability that causes a brass bug to spawn upon obtaining a boost. The one that can create a token from any character getting a boost is better than the one that requires the boost herself. Combine this with the unique that possesses the ability to give a character a boost upon a character entering play to cause an infinite loop. Despite the ability to score 4 points over 2 turns if this combo is not disrupted, it's not tearing up any tournament scenes, so don't think you need these to be as optimal as possible in Bravos. I don't think you can go wrong with aiming for effects that allow you to draw more cards or resupply, or discard or return characters to hand. Kojo is a pretty generic leader, so he isn't aiming for any specific effect text. Look for card draw effects that are easy to use and generically good effects. Double arrows are great for Kojo, but Sarah wants uniques that can take advantage of the boost. The most optimal seeming to be the Foundry armor bug spawners, but she can also take advantage of requirements that call for multiple boosted characters or for a character to receive a boost. Atsadi likes ramp effect text. While Kojo and Basira can take advantage of this as well, Atsadi obviously needs this to get his mana up quickly compared to his Bravos counterparts. The less requirements, the better of course, and the effects that only ramp you instead of both players are also obviously better. Lara has 4 effects that are highly sought after. The easiest to find is an at dusk, all character gain fleeting effect. These are typically found on Lara Cloth Dancers, but there are other characters that can carry this strong effect as well. The other 3 are repeatable effects: anchoring, resupply, and card recursion. This could trigger from playing a character with a 0 stat, rolling a die, or a card leaving your reserve. You want these without any requirements. Needing landmarks or 3-0 stats or any other requirement, while still playable, is not as strong as needing none. Also, being able to return any card and not just a spell are the strongest versions of the recursion effect. Lara Festival is also a thing. Uniques with multiple effects that can apply fleeting, anchor, and asleep all in one action are very powerful in this playstyle. Lara uniques want heroes that can take advantage of their requirements. Navinka likes uniques that require a dice roll.
She also likes effects that help you modify your dice roll, although I suggest sticking with bonuses that you get from rolling dice, as modifying your dice roll won't give you enough advantage or help your expeditions advance as much as the bonuses will.
Fen likes uniques that need a card to leave reserve, or have a condition that require a card to be put from your hand into reserve, or discard a card from reserve. You would think Arak wants cards that require a 0 stat character to be played, but all Lara heroes can take advantage of that since a lot of characters carry a 0 stat. In my opinion, Arak would prefer stat sticks. She can handle the uniques requiring 0 stats better than her counterparts as well. Muna's strongest effect is a repeatable anchor trigger. This could be triggered by playing a character or a character receiving a boost. This effect is extremely strong to the point where having some requirements like a landmark or 3 or more characters or the unique needing a number of boosts can be acceptable. Obviously, needing no requirement is much stronger. There are some requirements such as needing to put a card from hand into reserve, discarding a card from reserve, or paying a mana that make it a lot more difficult to use and should be avoided when looking to optimize your deck. If you're not looking for the best of the best, however, you can still make great use of these uniques that require a hand or discard requirement. Muna can also take advantage of the Lara Festival playstyle. Uniques with multiple effects that can apply fleeting, anchor, and asleep all in one action are very powerful in this playstyle. Tasia likes uniques that have a boost requirement. She can easily trigger the boost requirement for the repeatable anchor effect. Arjun likes 3-cost characters with strong repeatable effects. Quetzalcoatl is a name with a repeatable effect, but on other names you should aim for effect text with at dusk or at noon effects. Don't be baited by Ren's forest advancement requirement and think you need uniques that require the same. You don't want to be held down by such a restriction. For her, you can afford to run uniques whose effects require you to discard a card from reserve if needed. Oris' strongest unique effect, spam out tokens. The strongest version of this effect can create 2 tokens in any expedition when a non-token character joins your expedition. Weaker versions, such as ones that only spawn 1 token, or force them into a certain expedition, also exist and shouldn't be overlooked. This effect is strong enough to consider if it comes with a small requirement such as requiring a landmark or a certain amount of characters, but having a mana cost or card cost requirement makes the effect not as desirable. Charge effects seem simple, but have enough synergy in Oris decks that make them highly desirable. Since this isn't repeatable, this effect can afford to be accompanied by an easy to fulfill requirement, like requiring an amount of characters or needing to discard a card. Sigismar is Sigismar. Not much to say really. He can take advantage of uniques with a requirement to control the token or needs to sacrifice a character no problem. Waru likes uniques that can put characters to sleep to keep his bureaucrats around for another turn. Also, despite the nerf, he can still utilize the tax effects on bureaucrats. Yes, it was a change, but it still does something, and it still might be something your opponent isn't expecting. Gorang likes uniques that Sigismar and Waru don't want. That strong unique that you wouldn't slot into Sig or Waru? Yeah, that's for Gorang. Izmir doesn't have any generic unique effects like Oris or Muna does, but it does have extremely desirable effects for each hero. Akesha being the most generic benefits from good stuff effects and replacement uniques. Aphanis wants some of the most desirable uniques in the game, the coveted At Dusk Return a Card effect. Good luck finding these. If you're not a tryhard, respectfully of course, then Aphanis can take advantage of effects that recycle spells or trigger when casting a spell or receiving a boost. Lindway also wants heavily desirable uniques. The Moonlight Jellyfish unique can take Lindway from a disrespected low tier hero to a menacing threat. These jellyfish want a 1 hand cost and an arrow or hand ability that makes it sacrifice itself to recycle a card, not spell, from your reserve. This allows you to continuously recycle and sacrifice characters to increase the Maw's power. If you can't get your hands on these coveted jellyfish, then you'd probably try looking for effects that allow you to sacrifice a character or trigger upon being sacrificed. However, my personal suggestion would be just to look for generically good ones similar to Akesha. And that's it for today's video. See you in the next one. Thank you for watching and be sure to subscribe for more altered TCG content. Let me know in the comments what you think about the best uniques and what kind of video you would like to see next.